Hello and welcome. My name is Alonda Carter and I am the recovering Hunbot. And this is season 1, episode 7 of Hey Hun, You Woke Up. This podcast is brought to you on YouTube as a video. It also is playing on Stitcher and iTunes and Spotify. If you would like to support me as a content creator, the very best way you can do that is through my Patreon, and there will be a link to that in the description. I've made it simple. There are 3 tiers ranging from $1 to $10 a month, and literally any amount helps. Today's guest is my friend and fellow creator, Andey Fellowes. Now, he was never part of MLM, but he was involved with an internet cult, and that cult centered pretty much around the law of attraction. And when I first heard him, he was on Chris Shelton's show. And as I listened, I just thought, wow, that reminds me so much of my experience of being in MLM. Specifically, I was with Beachbody. So we thought it'd be interesting to see what kind of crossover there is between what his experience was like and what mine was like, and then just kind of, MLM in general. So join me in welcoming Andey to the show. And just so that you know, we did have a little bit of trouble with our connection. So there might be a little bit of, hesitation here and there. And I'm not sure if I caught everything, but I'm in the process of editing, so we'll see how it goes. So let's get on with the show.
Welcome, Andey. Thank you so much for joining me today, and go ahead and give us a piece of your story about how you got into the internet culture you were involved in, and then how you kind of realized that maybe this law of attraction thing isn't all that it's cracked up to be, and you woke up and decided, you know what, I have had enough of this, and walked away.
Okay, well, first of all, thanks for having me. And yeah, so really my story, it kind of started around the time that a close friend of mine passed away. I'd just come out of college, so I must have been 18, 19, that kind of age. And I was watching a lot of stuff on the internet. I was already kind of into kind of some spiritual stuff. I'd read a bit on Buddhism, read a bit on Taoism. So I was kind of already open to that kind of sort of the more ethereal ideas. And then I found a channel on YouTube called Spirit Science, which introduced me to a lot of what you could call new age ideas, new age concepts. I'd been around some of it a little bit growing up, crystals, meditation, the idea of chakras a little bit. And this channel kind of went in and explained a lot of that stuff in quite a simple way, in quite a palatable way, with some fun animations and all that stuff. And it was through that channel that I found the person who would become my cult leader a little bit later, someone called Teal Swan. At the time, she was called Teal Scott. And it was through her videos that I started to take on the law of attraction. And so I think anyone that is aware of the law of attraction, they will know that everyone that teaches it or talks about it in their own way. Like they have their own little take on it, but the core is ultimately the same. Teal's take on it was very kind of sacred science-y, to use Lifton's turn of phrase. It was very much an explanation as to how the universe works in specific terms, in terms of so there's always that thing of frequency and vibration and raise your vibration and you get high vibrational blah 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 and all that kind of stuff. Teal's take on it was very much kind of I think the thing with Teal is that she seemed to understand it better than anyone else I'd heard talk about it. She seemed to have a handle on it that the other people I'd heard speak about it didn't necessarily have. And I think that was part of the confidence that she spoke with. Looking back, I don't think that she necessarily understood it better than anybody else as a concept, perhaps, but it was just her take on it and her confidence that penetrated for me and made it something that I really got on board with quite quickly. So over a couple of years, I just watched everything that. Can you hear me all right? Am I still here?
I can. You froze up a little bit.
Okay. So I'll just carry on from where I was there. So over the years, I kind of took on this idea more and more. I think I was involved with the group maybe 3 years, give or take. Leaving the group was a kind of slow process, and it was really, the law of attraction was one of the last pieces to go for me. Even after I lost faith in the leader, law of attraction was still kind of around a little. For me, it didn't hang on much longer than my belief in the leader, but it definitely hung around a little bit longer. So I feel like this is something that happens with a lot of people who are interested in the law of attraction, who get into the law of attraction. As soon as it starts to affect the way that you're interpreting your experience, it does very the whole nature of the idea of the law of attraction is that it's prescriptive. It's almost like, right, so this happens to you means this, therefore you need to do that, right? And that at the moment that your entire life becomes colored by it. If that does that make sense? Am I getting that across well?
Yeah. To me, it does make sense. And, bringing it into the bubble of multi-level marketing, personal development is very key. Probably, I would say for most all of them, there's going to be something all about mindset and having your mind right and keeping your mind and your vision and all of that. So it sounds very much like, for me and for people who have been in multi-level marketing, that once that starts becoming part of your life, like what you're saying, you start to think differently. You shift your thinking, so to speak, and not in a great way, in a way that can be damaging.
No, I mean, especially if you're someone who's prone to anxiety, it can become very, very damaging very quickly, because it almost lends itself towards a kind of neurosis, a kind of obsessive picking over of, I shouldn't have thought that, or what if I'm thinking that means I'm going to attract this, or if I'm feeling this, that means I'm going to attract this, and that can get you in a real state. And I know a lot of people who have experienced that, and since starting to make the videos I've been making, I've met a few people who have come to me and just said, do you know what, I felt I had the same thing happen with this, and so on. Something I wanted to pick up on there, you said about the personal development aspect. That was also part of what I experienced there as well. Following Teal, is it's changed a little bit now. There's like a new process that people do. But when I was involved in it, it was shadow work, which is based on Carl Jung's kind of shadow work kind of thing.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that, because I did something that was similar to that, but it wasn't called shadow work, but
Really?
it had to, yes, it was journaling. And it was like kind of those similar questions that I've heard you use in your examples. People who are listening may not know what you mean by shadow work. So go ahead and explain that so they can, get a full flavor of it.
Okay, so as far as I understand it, and I've done some research into other kind of therapeutic methods and all the rest of it since leaving, as far as I'm aware, shadow work is similar to CBT in one regard, similar to cognitive behavioral therapy in one regard. There is the downward arrow questioning. I could be wrong about this, so please don't just take my word for this. Check out, hit Google and see what Google has to say about this. But the downward arrow questioning, the kind of what does that mean to you? If that were true, why would it be so bad? Those are two questions that I kind of, I'm trying to remember the kinds of questions that were encouraged at the time. But yeah, that kind of, if that were true, why would that be so bad? Was quite common. And what this kind of thinking did for me and many other people who were doing this, and this was encouraged often, like during my time in the group, this was encouraged often. Anytime you had a strong emotional reaction, until uses the word triggered, which obviously she seems to have borrowed from, it's become more commonly used now, but at the time it seemed to be borrowed more from like trauma counseling and that kind of thing, which is a whole other thing with Teal. But yeah, so whenever you're triggered, whenever you have a strong emotional reaction, that's the time to do a process. So you're already in a very emotional state, and then that emotion's taken, and you by asking yourself these questions, you go deeper and deeper into your emotion until you find a core belief. And the core belief is something that you hold as true, something you believe to be true, that apparently governs your life, governs the way that you do things, and is part of your, I'm gonna kind of butcher the phrases and so on here, but your dominant vibration, right? It's the thing that if you've got this core belief, that's going to affect what you're capable of attracting in your life, what you're attracting, and it will limit what you can or can't attract, if that makes sense.
Oh, it makes
so
so
you
much
have
sense.
to
Because I've been there, done that.
So it was a similar thing in what you were involved in.
Yeah. And what I was involved in, it wasn't Beachbody, but as we were talking before I started recording and everything, with multi-level marketing, you don't only have whatever company you're in, but generally there's all these peripheral things that you get attracted to because you're looking for the answer. You're looking for that thing that's going to show you the way and give you the tools, and you're finally going to be able to have that success. And you said something earlier that it also made, I went, whoa, okay, I got to talk about this, because you brought up that, law of attraction can induce neuroses, in your opinion. Well, I think that also it's going to be a two-pronged kind of a neuroses when it comes to multi-level marketing, because you are struggling so much to get someone to buy your crappy product, and I'm just going to say they're all crappy products, they're less than stellar, or join your team, or both. And so you're already chasing that and feeling like less than and unsure of yourself because you're not having the success that you're told you'll have if you just follow whatever is laid out for you. And the other day, as I told you, I did a video on the business activity tracker for Beachbody, which is all about then getting Success Club points, because once you have, it's just this whole process of everything. But all of that, I can remember feeling very neurotic, chasing after all of that. And now add on to it, on top of that, the law of attraction. So I think it amplifies the entire mess when you're in multi-level marketing, in addition to following law of attraction, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And when you tie in finance to that as well, there's going to be an extra level of tension that comes in, because you're thinking, I've got bills to pay, although perhaps that's not the case for everyone. I don't know that everybody in who's involved in MLMs is going to be the sole breadwinner of a family or whatever. But when you do bring bills and so on into it, of course you're going to get that extra level of tension as well. So something I did want to kind of add in here while we're on this is something that I found, and I suppose I mentioned to you before, I've kind of been around the personal development, the self-help, the network marketing stuff. I've been around that for a long time. I was going to events in London when I was like 13, 14, things like that. I've kind of been in and out of it. As I've grown up, I've kind of distanced myself from it somewhat. However, the idea of constant self-improvement has been a hard one to shake. And while it's not bad to want to better yourself, I don't think it's necessarily a negative thing to go for better if that's what you need in your life, if things aren't great. And if you're not happy or you're not satisfied, then maybe it's a good thing to go for improvement. But there are times where you've got to say, do you know what, maybe this is enough. Maybe I am enough. And actually, and I think sometimes, maybe this isn't the best way of saying it, but sometimes mediocrity is okay in some areas. And sometimes you kind of just got to say, do you know what, this is good enough right now. I'm happy enough with this. And then focus on being happy rather than focusing on being better all the time. That's what I think anyway. And I know that may not chime with some people who are involved in this kind of thing. But I think, especially if we're talking about mental health, there's definitely a case to be made for sometimes just chilling out and just saying, right, Is that going? Behind you, that's going. Do you want
Oh
to
my
bring
gosh. Oh,
that back?
goodness. Chalupa, did you do that? It sure did. Well, there. I'm blaming
There you go.
Chalupa. There you are, Chalupa Poopa. Oh, my God. Come here, chunky monkey.
As you say, sometimes when we're doing these kinds of things, some things don't quite go as planned, but that's all good.
But you know what? You just persevere.
Yeah, absolutely. Keep
Chalupa,
on keeping on.
he just wants attention, and now Tamale's running around, And you have your cats behind you all the time in your
Yeah.
videos, which is
They've
always
just woken up,
entertaining.
actually, so we'll see what's going to happen.
But, I think it's very interesting that you bring up the connection of, Chalupa, you're going to unplug things, mental health and the law of attraction and the being enough and all of that. Because in multi-level marketing, at least with Beachbody, part of your daily activities was to do at least a minimum of like 20 minutes of personal development each and every single day.
Okay.
And so that became a huge part of my life, because it's like, well, what book do I read now? What do I listen to now? I mean, it just feeds into the entire group think, the entire, being around those people, like I told you earlier, like-minded people, because they're going to keep you in check, if you're all believing the same stuff. But I do think that it can be dangerous with your mental health. Overall, I mean, multi-level marketing overall, I would say, is a problem for people and their mental health.
Yeah, I could see that, definitely. I could see that. I think as well, that in a lot of groups that are, very controlling, very, very encouraging people to act a certain way, do things a certain way. What you say there about people keeping each other in check, you see that all the time. And I know people who are Jehovah's Witnesses. The same thing is true there, that kind of keeping an eye on people and making sure that they're sticking to it. Yeah, you see that so often. What was I going to pick up on from what you said there? And I was going to say as well, did you want me to go back at some point to like how I got out of the law of attraction?
Oh, yes.
Perhaps maybe towards the end or whatever, however you want to do it. Might be a good way to end the conversation. But however you want to play that. What was I going to say? I don't know. Slipped my mind. Was there anything you wanted to carry on?
Oh, I'm sure we can come up with something, Okay, I will tell you this. I don't think I've ever said this publicly. And this is when Alonda was neck deep into Beachbody and neck deep into personal development and law of attraction. And I can remember, and I got this from somewhere, I don't know where, but I said this to a very good friend of mine because she was going through a difficult time, and she had been one of my coaches, but she ended up dropping. Just everybody did, but that's another story in and of itself. But I was talking about, and I was really behaving very differently because I have always been very skeptical about things, maybe somewhat cynical about stuff, and just not accepting things at their face value. And for instance, because she and I worked together, and things that we were doing, I did instructional design. I don't know if I had told you that or not, designing courses, and I was working for an oil company. And there were things that were like so obviously wrong. And I'm like, my gosh, the emperor's naked, but nobody is willing to say anything. And that always drove me nuts. Because it's like his tallywhacker's right there. I can see it. Y'all can see it, but you're not saying anything. So I'm talking to her, and I'm talking to her about the law of attraction. And she's like, yeah, but I'm like, well, it works for you if you believe it, but if it doesn't work for you, or if you don't believe it, then it works too. Basically, you're getting what you put out, sort of a thing. And which, I find that to be a very interesting double-edged sword, because it still all points back to you.
And it's very circular logic, I find, as well. So if anyone hasn't heard of confirmation bias, definitely give that one a Google, because that really answers that point, and I'm gonna, as I say, I'm gonna butcher the explanation of this now. So Google it. But yeah, the idea that you're looking for something, or you believe in something, and then something happens, and you then rationalize your experience into saying, well, that proves what I believe, right? And so, I mean, I had that as well. The if you don't believe in it, then it's not going to work for you. That happened. I vaguely remember Teal putting a video out at one point saying that a good exercise to determine whether, you know, to prove to yourself that the law of attraction works was the thing, so that you could then believe in it. And again, very circular logic there. What you had to do is you had to come up with something that you wouldn't normally see in your day or your life or whatever, and then like think about it a lot, and then when it came up in your life, then that would prove that the law of attraction works, because you've attracted that thing into your life, whatever it was, something that you don't care about. So there's a whole thing which that kind of leads on. First of all, before I go to the whole thing, the first thing there is that I don't know very many people that will have thought of something that they genuinely wouldn't find in their day. And I think that would be a good test to do. Like, for example, something that you would absolutely never see in your day-to-day life, wherever you are, which is probably quite a difficult thing to do, because you might first think, well, I live, for example, at the time I lived in England, I live in England, so I'm never going to see a penguin, right? But then there's going to be signs with penguins on, there's going to be things around, things like that. And I think that reasonably, if you're thinking of something a lot, the chances of you noticing something you hadn't previously noticed, or the chances of you having noticed that on some level and that being in your head as an unlikely thing to see, then meaning that you choose that thing, then you see that thing, that goes then to confirm. I know it sounds a bit convoluted, but that kind of thing I think is a more reasonable explanation than that you have somehow harnessed the hidden powers of the universe and energy, vibration, all that kind of stuff has meant that you are now going to see that thing. Am I explaining that well? I feel like maybe I didn't.
I think so, because I mean, what it made me think about is, like, let's say that you want to get a new car and you go and test drive that new car, and you know, and you like the car, but you haven't gotten it yet. All of a sudden, that's all you see all around you is that same kind of car. It's there. And I think it's like, once you become aware of something, just like what you were saying, the penguin or whatever, now you start seeing it. Well, it's been there all along. You just weren't focused on it.
Exactly. Now you're looking for it. You're going to see it.
Yeah.
You know? And that's kind of what I was getting at there, which perhaps I didn't explain as well as I'd have liked to, is that if the penguin's been there anyway, and you're sitting down going, what's an unlikely thing that I'm absolutely never going to see? You're only going to think of so many things. And the chances of you picking a penguin, it's possible that you would pick a penguin having already on some level been aware that there was a penguin there. Do you know what I'm getting at? And then because it's in your head, you might pick that, and then you're going to see it. And then, so, and I think it reminds me of a time. So after I got out of the whole cult thing, and I was still very much involved in spirituality and stuff, I got into mantras and doing these so there's the Hindu deity Ram. I got into just repeating Ram, 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 Ram over and over again. And it's weird now doing that. My brain's already started to disassociate a little bit. But I used to do that a lot. Like as much as I could in a day, I would just do that consistently. And then, funnily enough, I started to notice the car brand that's Ram.
Yeah,
it's written the same. I started to notice that a lot more.
Interesting.
And it's and I hadn't noticed that before. They will have been around. They're not actually common in the UK. I don't think I've ever seen one in the UK, but since I moved to the American continent, I see them. I've started to see them a lot. And when I was in America, in Vegas, I noticed that was kind of at the peak of my interest in this kind of thing. I did start to notice those I think like pickup trucks or whatever with that on quite a lot. And again, they were there, but I hadn't noticed them. I didn't know to look. But now I was looking for it, I was going to see it.
Yeah.
And so that, in terms of that thing, that definitely answers that in my mind, or at least provides a more reasonable explanation in my mind, than energy and all this kind of stuff. And another thing I was going to pick up on there was the way that, I don't know if this is similar with your experience of this, but in my experience, the part of the sacred science of the law of attraction, part of the way that it was said to work was, if you are resistant of something, then that means that it's going to be the whole "what you resist persists" thing.
Oh gosh, that is an MLM saying too.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's clearly a crossover here.
Yes.
And it's not anecdotal at this point. It seems we've got many instances of this, right? So the whole "what you resist persists" thing's there. So the reason it was encouraged that you think of something random with that little, if you can call it an experiment, that little experiment was because you would have no resistance to seeing that thing or attracting that thing, right? But if you can't attract something if you're in some way in resistance to it. So that the whole thing is, that's why affirmations don't work, because you're trying to convince yourself of something that's not true, right? So you have to do shadow work, find out why you don't believe that's true, come to believe that's true, and then you don't need to do the affirmation. That's that whole thing. And so to some extent, and this is something that does happen a lot with people in Teal's position, who I would say is a cult leader, what they typically do is they will pepper in truth. I think Telltale said this in a video recently. They'll pepper in truth in amongst things which are demonstrably false, or just unverifiable, unfalsifiable. So you could definitely see that an affirmation might not work if actually there is something that you're saying that you don't believe, and you're that disbelief or belief in whatever it is that is stopping you from accepting that thing is deeply ingrained in you. Of course, you're not going to accept that. However, there's a whole other universal vibrational frequency thing that perhaps doesn't have so much basis in fact there. So it's very interesting how much of a crossover there is between these two things. For me, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it really is, because until I sat down and started talking to someone else, it's like it goes to like, you don't realize it, and it's helped me so much watching your videos, watching Chris Shelton's, watching John Attack's videos. All of those help me break down what has happened to me from having been in a multi-level marketing company. And I don't think most people who have been involved in a multi-level marketing company realize the psychological fallout, if you will, that they undergo afterwards. Because you hear about like people helping others who have been through like Scientology, through that cult or whatever. But when it's multi-level marketing, you are just on an island on your own and have no idea that you've been raked over through the coals, upwards, backwards, sideways, and every which other way. And I think it's highly, highly damaging to the psyche. And, I would go so far to say it's probably like an epidemic, since there's been multi-level marketing in the US, for like over 70 years. And there are some people that will bounce from one to another, to another, to another. And so you stay within that mindset all the time, and it becomes further a part of you. So you get further away from the person that you were. And then if you do get out, now you are this altered person. And I believe Stephen Hassan has talked about that. And I think that's the problem, is that person that's who you are after. You don't know how to put yourself back together. Humpty Dumpty has definitely fallen, and you are just shattered.
Yeah, absolutely. It does take time. And honestly, I would recommend that anybody who is involved in anything like this and ends up coming out of it does seek professional help. Even if you don't think you need it. And I think we're at a point now where we can say that the general consensus is moving towards therapy isn't just for messed up people. We could all benefit from a little bit of therapy. And I feel like if you've been in something like this, you might not know how much it has affected you, how deeply this has bothered you on some level, or has affected you, in some way. And I think that getting yourself in front of a professional, even if it turns out that actually, no, you're doing all right, you just perhaps need to do X, Y, or Z. That's a very simple thing. Definitely it's worth getting yourself in front of a professional, I think, because it does take time to reconcile the experiences of your life that are so disparate from inside and outside. Even if like in my case, like I did kind of grow up around somewhat spiritual ideas and so on and so forth, that was still a very different experience to being a Tealer, a follower of Teal, and being around the other people that were like that, and the way that changed who I was. And I've done videos on my channel. I don't know if you've seen them, where I'm looking back at, one of the cats has come to say hi, where I'm looking back at who I was when I was in it, and the way I talked and the words I used, and all my mannerisms and everything were different. And I'm looking back at those, and I'm kind of poking fun at who I was, but I think it's also a really important comparison to make, and a really important thing for each of us to face in some way, I feel, because that did happen. And it's not nice to think about, maybe when you come out of it, and especially for people who feel ashamed of having been through it, which I really feel is that's being really tough on yourself if you're feeling ashamed, because, well, I can understand it. I do feel like in a lot of cases, you've been subjected to a process. Like, you've been targeted, you've been carried through a process of what you could call indoctrination. And so for you to not end up the way that you did would have been really difficult, unless you already knew everything you know now about this. I don't think that you could have avoided it. And even if you did know everything you know now, that still doesn't completely protect you, because these things are nasty things. They're subtle things. They're clever things. So you've got to be aware of how these things work. And yeah, I think arrogance doesn't protect you. I think if you're thinking, oh, hang on, got a cat problem. Yeah, I think if you think, I'm immune, I know all about this stuff now, I'm immune, they're not going to get me ever again. The minute you strut up in front of a Jehovah's Witness cutting, or you put yourself in front of the average cult recruiter, the chances of them undermining you, the chances of them getting in your head, I think, go up a little bit, because you're not aware in that moment of what might be happening, because you're preoccupied with, I'm never going to get me, so it's really important to be aware of these things. And I think that leads on to something else that perhaps doesn't need to be said, but yeah, just, I think, kindness with people as well who are involved in these things, and yourself. Include yourself in that kindness, having come out of it. Yeah.
Something I say is to be gentle with yourself.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because
Absolutely.
It's like, we're very hard on ourselves, of like, oh, well, I was stupid, I was this, I was that. It's like, no, you're not stupid. You're just, you were, like you said, you were targeted. You went through a process. You were, it's a slow burn. Nobody just like, nobody wakes up one day and says, well, I am going to be indoctrinated and change my entire personality. No one does that.
I fancy joining a cult today.
I think it sounds like a
it doesn't
idea.
happen, does it?
It doesn't.
No, it doesn't happen.
1-800 join cult now. You know what I mean? It's like, you just don't do that.
Yeah, but, no, you don't, do you?
And there's so many times, I think, so many instances where things are called, oh, there's that sweet baby. And people don't even know it. They have no idea. Like, I had no idea about, being in Beachbody and everything. I would have denied. It was like, oh no, because it doesn't seem like it, because it seems, quote, innocent, because this is, quote, a business opportunity, and you're investing in yourself. with the personal development, and you're being a product of the product by showing other people, and you're being the person that you're going to be in 7 years when you have all the success. So you're going to act as if now. All of that changes you. And then you add in the loaded language.
Mm-hmm.
And the cognitive dissonance,
Mm-hmm.
the undue
Yep.
influence, just like all of it, it's all just working on you. And it's just like one chink at a time of changing who you are.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, it is slow. I mean, I was told off for using the frog in the boiling water thing on my channel. Someone came on and was like, actually, no, the frog would notice and it would jump out. So apparently frogs aren't quite as susceptible to undue influence as humans. But yeah, no,
we will sit there. We'll stay in that water. Like, oh,
yeah, I mean, it's it's actually quite nice. I'm getting used to it.
It's like, some of my skin's bubbling. It's good. It's fine. Let me drink a shake,
Got cat hair in my mouth now. But yeah, no, it is that kind of thing. And I think as social creatures as well, what I often think with this is that so much of how these groups work is turning human nature against itself and making you kind of all the things that we have evolved as humans to survive together and work as people who are gonna survive through whatever happens. We can work together and the various things in terms of like tribalism and so on and so forth. All these kinds of things that have come about, which have helped us survive as humans. All of that stuff's turned on its head when you're put in a cult situation, because you're conforming to a group when the group itself is unsafe, when the group itself is toxic, doesn't lead you anywhere good, right? And so I think when you are in that kind of situation, because of as well, I think things like, as you mentioned, cognitive dissonance, it does become very difficult to see things. And then you add to that, as you say, the cult identity aspect, where you're playing a character to some extent, even though you're there, but it's the way it felt for me is that I'm there, but I'm like way back. I'm pushed way back and way down. And then there's this other version of me that's like, hello. And it's another person, right? And the other version of me did come out at times. And I think Hassan talked about that in Combating Cult Mind Control. The real you, if you like, does come out at times, comes out to play a little bit. But the moment you're challenged, the moment you're pushed on what you believe, or the leader, or the lifestyle, or whatever it is the moment you start parroting phrases, is the moment you start like giving the reasons and the stuff that you've been taught is the right way to think about this, and that's when you can kind of notice it, I think, in a person. And I don't know how many times I became aware that I was doing that. I think towards the end and after I got out of it, I noticed when I started slipping back into that kind of thing, because the way that our brains are, right, is that we're creatures of habit. We start to do these things, and then it becomes harder to change that habit. And I'm sure there's a whole thing about habit forming in the MLMs. Oh, yeah. Stuff. So we're all familiar with that. I don't need to go to retread that ground. But the more, and that goes against you when you're forming habits that ultimately, in some cases, make other people rich, or in the case of a group I was involved in, ultimately lend to making the leader feel really great about herself. It's kind of and many other things. I feel like one of the reasons that it's gone on for so long really is because it's so enjoyable as a human to have everyone think you're so great. And that's kind of what's happened in the group that I was involved in, I think. But I've kind of lost my train of thought there. What was I saying? Where was I?
You were talking about, oh gosh. It was like as you were kind of starting to slip away from the group itself, your real self started, kind of peeking out. And
yeah, I mean, so all through the experience, my real self popped up, and you'll see that a lot with these kinds of things as well. Hassan talks about it, how you get kind of the old you, the pre-cult you will pop up on occasion, and then something will happen and you'll be triggered into the cult identity again. So for me, one of the things that really shocked me, and actually it was a big part of me looking back into Teal Swan again before coming back to YouTube, was that I said to someone who I care a lot about, who was going through some difficult times with their mental health, I actually said something that was one of Teal's things. And I was like, where did that come from? I don't think that. I don't believe that. Not now. I've reevaluated this. And yet I found myself saying this, and in that moment, really believing it. I was feeling challenged when it came out. And so I was like, hang on a minute. Where's that come from? I thought I was shot at this years ago,
mm-hmm.
And so I started looking back into it all and started to understand it for what it is a little bit more. And that eventually led me to come back to YouTube. But it was Teal's thing about committing to life. I'm not going to go into it too much because it goes down a very dark path, but about committing to life. And I kind of said that, and I was like, that's not me. That's not the me I know. That's the different me. Like that's a cult me, And that was quite a shock for me. And my spouse heard me saying that and kind of defending that in a conversation after I'd said it with her, and she was like, it's surprising to me to hear you say that, after all of this time. And because obviously she was around at the time as well when I was involved in it, and she kind of dipped her toe into it but didn't really get as into it as I did. So it's fascinating how these things get into your head and how they stick around, and how and that's kind of why I say, if you've been involved in this, whether you think you're fine or not coming out, it's definitely worth speaking to someone, a professional who can help you make sense of it. Even if you think I'm fine, I'm fine, I don't need that, wouldn't hurt. 1 session, 2 sessions, 3 sessions probably wouldn't hurt, just to be sure that you are fine and everything's okay. So did you want me to talk a little bit about getting out of it?
Yes. Because I think that's really interesting. I think it can help people see that they can break out of whatever's going on, with in their head of having been involved with MLM. There is ways to shed that, so to speak. And so was there a particular incident that snapped you, or was it just over time? Just, give us the backstory on that.
It was slow. And I think with a lot of people, the way I kind of think about it is that it's a slow process of unraveling. And then there's a moment, and you kind of, for many people, you remember that moment. For me, it was less a moment, and it was more a gradual bit by bit. And then my life changed quite drastically, which I'll get into, for the better, in a positive way, in the end of it all. But there are people who are just like, right, that's the straw that broke the camel's back, but for me, it was pretty gradual. For me, leaving the law of attraction behind, I think I mentioned earlier that the law of attraction was kind of the last thing of a series of things to go for me. And so the process kind of went that I was very much into Teal. It was kind of Teal from the minute I woke up to the minute I went to sleep at night. It was Teal, it was the law of attraction, it was resistance, it was shadow work, it was all these kinds of things just floating around in my head. And I was sure that I was on the right path, to the point where I was preaching it to everyone, and what had happened really was that there was one point where I was living in a flat with the girlfriend at the time, and that kind of ended. The relationship ended, which I'm actually in hindsight fine with, although it was some really bad advice of Teal's that led me to end that relationship, which I went through I think a little bit in my chat with Chris Shelton on his channel. And yeah, so that kind of that relationship ended. We moved out of the flat, and I did what I called at the time a bit of traveling, which wasn't really a bit of traveling. I probably went 2 or 3 places around the UK, slept on some friends' sofas and floors, and then ended up at the Teal Swan workshop in London. So this is 2014. And it actually wasn't long. You would expect that if you go to a workshop like that would be like, it would be a little while after that you would still be interested in it, and then you would, if you were going to leave, it would be way down the line. But actually for me, that was probably the height of my interest and belief in Teal, and after that it kind of tapered off a little bit. So after that I didn't really have anywhere to go because I'd moved out of the flat. I'd been traveling a little bit, so I went back home, went to my mum's, and I'd sleep on the sofa for a bit. I'm from quite a big family, and as anyone who's from a big family will know, in the mornings it gets very noisy if you've got young people in the house. And me on the sofa trying to sleep didn't really, not very well. So so I decided at one point I was going to take it's a little bit of extra information here. Mental health wise, I wasn't doing very well. I was struggling more and more throughout this, because shadow work is doing it Teal's way, in my opinion, is not the way to improve your mental health. It's the way to see your mental health deteriorate pretty rapidly. And so that was what was happening for me. I was so sure that I knew myself better than ever, and yet I was missing the fact that I was probably more depressed than ever. And more insecure than ever. And anxiety had kind of started to work its way in, but that didn't come until later, really, for me. So I wasn't doing well in terms of my mental health. I was around my family, but I wasn't connecting with them really, because in my head it was all law of attraction, Teal, blah, 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 as I mentioned. So they were living their life as they've always done, but I wasn't really there with them. So I separated from that a little bit and ended up taking myself away to my mum's utility room, which is where I stayed for probably 10 months, most of the day, and sleeping there as well. That's like a 6x6 room. And
Wow.
yeah. And I'm probably about 6 foot. So there wasn't much space there. And so a lot of people hear that and they think, well, why didn't you just stop and just go get a job and go get yourself a place and stuff? The thing is, with this kind of a thing, is it gets in your head to such a degree that that's not an option. It's not an option for you. This is the way. This is the only way. And you're so sure it's right. And so what happened for me was that I was in that room and I was there a lot. My mum tried to make space for me, but as I say, big family, there really wasn't room, and there was not really anywhere else for me to be. So she didn't like it any more than anybody else did, but that was where I was, in that room for quite a while. And during that time, I put my profile into a Teal Tribe dating Facebook group, which was for people to meet other people that also felt like Teal was the most important thing in their lives.
Wow.
And that, interestingly, is where I met my current spouse. And we put our profiles in there, and we talked a little bit. We'd actually had one conversation before, but didn't really click. It was through like Facebook Messenger. But now we put the profiles in there. We started to talk a bit more, and one thing led to another. We got to know each other quite well. And relationships started to blossom. And it was in talking to Rosa that I started to find, I think so, something that we talked about a little bit on the podcast, that we just recorded the first episode for my patrons, is how loneliness, cats are playing, just one of them meowing. Loneliness is one of the huge driving factors, I think, for people who do get involved in these kinds of things, especially in terms of like Teal Tribe and stuff. It may be for everybody, and it may not be the case for it's really going off over there. I don't know if you can hear.
No, I can't, but my two were going crazy a minute ago.
But yeah, so loneliness is something that it does seem is quite prevalent. I mean, it's quite a prevalent thing in society anyway, so maybe it's just, the case that there's a crossover there. But for me and for Rosa, loneliness was a real thing. And so when we started to talk and connect, we were feeling less lonely, and it suddenly became safer to question these ideas that were giving us a community, and giving us answers and making us feel safe in the world. So it was, I think, if I remember, I was very much into Teal, but I started to have some really negative turns in terms of my mental health with shadow work. And Rosa said to me, look, have you considered just laying off on the shadow work for a little bit, just for a little while, just for maybe a week or two, and just see how you feel? And it was that I hadn't thought of that, because you don't when you're in these things. It's just, as I say, it's inconceivable that you would even consider changing anything. It's because it's got to work, right? At some point, if I just keep at it, maybe it's my fault. As we've said, it must be my fault that it's not working. So I just need to figure this and I need to figure that, and then it would work. But no, so I hadn't thought of this. And Rosa said, look, I've noticed that you're not feeling great. Maybe if you just left the shadow work for a little bit, that might help. And obviously I was resistant initially, but I left it for 2 weeks. It stopped doing just consistent shadow work for 2 weeks or so. And what do you know? I started to feel a little bit better. My mental health started to improve. And it was a little while later that through talking to Rosa as well, again, we were both having conversations about Teal and about the teachings and all that kind of thing. So Rosa wasn't as into it as I was. She was involved, but she wasn't as into it as I was. She hadn't absorbed every minute of Teal Swan content, or Teal Scott, then Teal Swan content that I had. And I was like a sponge for it. It was everything I could get. So what happened was I had to start explaining some of the concepts, some of the ideas to Rosa. And in explaining them, they started to fall down a little bit. They started to make a little bit less sense, because, I don't know if this is the same, if you've experienced something like this in your experiences, where you've heard it explained and it makes total sense. And then you try and explain it to someone and you can't quite articulate it in the same way. And then it starts like, that does, I promise you that makes sense, but I just can't quite figure out how that makes sense right now. Right.
But it does.
I promise it does. So just take my word for this kind of a thing. And so that was kind of what was happening. And really, I did feel like I'd made sense of something that was really true. And as I was explaining it to Rosa, and she started asking me questions and pointing things out, and I was like, So that was for me, that was the shadow work. And then Teal starting to be questioned a little bit started to happen. And then there was some, and I won't go into the whole losing faith in Teal thing now. I don't think that's as relevant with the law of attraction stuff, but pretty soon I started to see who Teal actually is, and the truth of her character, and started to see that maybe she's not this really wise, intelligent person that I thought she was, and maybe she's human like the rest of us, and maybe she's got a few flaws that maybe make her someone that doesn't deserve to be followed. And then I think it was probably a couple of weeks, as little as a couple of weeks after that I started to think, well, if I'm not doing shadow work anymore, and if Teal's wrong about these things, and if she's not so sure, if I'm not so sure on her as a person, then maybe this law of attraction thing isn't quite what it's cracked up to be as well. And so I started to look at that a little bit. So again, it was kind of an experiment, an informal experiment to just say, well, what if maybe instead of trying to control everything, control my thoughts, control my feelings, all this kind of stuff, what if I just went with the flow a little bit? Now, there's a lot to be said about going with the flow as an attitude, and maybe it's not so great in every instance. But at this point for me, it was the change I think I needed to get out of it. And this was after months of like visualizations and all this kind of stuff of trying to like envision my perfect life and envision myself getting out of that room and trying to build like businesses. I tried to be a life coach. Can you believe, as someone living in a utility room at their mum's house?
You had it all figured out.
So, I did. I had all the answers.
All the answers. Yes.
All
yes.
the answers. It's astonishing that.
I have to ask you this because something that I have heard within the circles I was in with all this law of attraction stuff is like people talk about being in flow, and that you've got to be in flow, and that's when you're aligned, and you know everything is just happening the way that it should. You're attracting everything to you. Was that part of your experience with Teal about getting in flow?
I've heard that in other kind of circles, but so with Teal's thing, it's about authenticity. It's a word that she has kind of repurposed.
Your authentic self.
Yeah. And so it wasn't as much about the flow. So the way I perceive the flow is almost like you're not thinking, you're just being, right? That's that kind of thing, like present moment awareness kind of a thing. How is it?
I don't think I was ever really in it. So it's gonna be.
That's why it didn't work. That's why it didn't work. You see.
But it's like, I remember one particular guru, female also, of talking about how everything was so wonderful when she was in flow state, and I'm like, well, what do you do to get in flow state? And some of it almost seemed like it was like they'd whipped themselves into a frenzy almost to get there, about how talking about like what they were wanting, and then saying things to themselves over and over again, and just kind of like allowing the energy of the universe to come through them, or some crazy crap like that. That's
hyping themselves up.
Yeah.
So that's not as much, that wasn't as much a thing in my experience. And I think that's purely down to the nature of Teal's teachings. Teal's teachings are very much more about, embrace all aspects of yourself, even the darker parts, and the consequence of that is that people do tend to revel in the darker parts of their character a little more. And then there's the whole thing with mental health and trauma and all that kind of stuff. As I say, we don't have to go down that one today, but there's a lot of that kind of stuff. So it wasn't as this is the interesting thing about the whole Teal situation, is that typically with cults, they want to keep you in a positive frame of mind. They want to keep you only thinking about the positives and only showing a positive front to the world, because if you don't look happy, then how are they going to be convinced that this is the right way, right? That kind of a thing. But that wasn't as much the case with Teal, and I feel like to some extent that's somewhat more detrimental to the followers, because obviously they're not in a positive. Hang on, cat's going to knock this cup over. They're not. You're not in that positive state. Your mental health is all over the place. You're living your life like you're kind of like your heart's bleeding everywhere, kind of a thing. So no, it wasn't as much the hype thing or getting yourself hyped up. But I could definitely see that playing into it, almost getting yourself so you're not thinking and you're just in a certain state.
And you're just in the state. You're just kind of there. But you did say something earlier that it really like struck a chord with me, and you were talking about the face that you project. Of like being happy, because I think of all the people in multi-level marketing and the lifestyle that they're projecting,
Mm.
all the smiles and like, oh, everything is so grand. But I especially I'm thinking about the people that are higher up Huns, um,
Mm.
that behind the smile, there's a lot of sadness. There's a lot of
Mm.
darkness there, but they're trying to just like make it look so amazing. And it's like, but I have to think like really in somewhere in their heads, they know
Mm.
this ain't so great, but but it's going to be great as long as I keep pretending like it's
Mm.
great and I make other people think it's great. And then they
Mm.
keep making it seem like it's great. We'll all just be happy. But
Like a
it's,
kind of fake it till you make it
oh yeah,
situation.
that's definitely one of the sayings is fake it till you make it, and also
Oh,
failing
really?
forward. Oh my gosh, there are so many, and it's like I hear them
These
now, and
little,
I'm like,
yeah,
oh, I'm
these
like,
little quips, and you're just like, like they're supposed to sound true, but again, you kind of think through it. What does that mean? What's that? That's just something that sounds smart. That's going to convince me to do X, Y, or Z. That's in favor of the group typically as
yes, it's always in favor of the group. And one of
well.
the ones I think that just grinds my gears the most is, oh crap, I had it and now it just escaped me. What is it? Oh, success leaves clues. What the hell is that?
Yeah, what does that
Yeah,
mean?
it's like you
What?
think like, you're getting momentum. It's like, oh, see, so there's a clue. So you're just going to just keep going. And it's like, it's craziness. It's just like all
Yeah.
these little sayings. It's like they don't have any weight, but when you're in it,
Mm.
they are everything.
I could imagine success leaves clues being something that you would come away from like a seminar saying, because it would take an hour and a half to get you to the point where you would say that and think it means something. Do you know what I mean? Like they would like set it up in a bunch of different ways.
Oh, maybe that's where it originates, but I've heard it multiple times with Beachbody on the every
Yeah.
Monday they have the national wake up call, and people will
Yeah.
say that success leaves clues, like like whatever you were doing, like it's just leading you to your future self.
Mm. Yeah.
It's
No, I have
like,
no idea where it comes from. I just could imagine it being one of those things that if you just say it, like you just said to me there, I'm like, what? Sorry, what? But like, I could imagine you needing like an hour and a half seminar to get someone to the point where they think it means something, like to talk them to the point. Yeah. But then I suppose if you're in the culture of it all and you've already got like 10 other little phrases, that one's just a welcome addition.
it's another one. It's like, oh, I'll pick that up and use it too,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
obviously it's true. Everybody else believes it. It goes back to
Mm.
the
Yeah.
emperor's naked, but we're all going to pretend like he's
Mm.
clothed.
Mm.
It's just a bunch of nonsense. But
Mm.
I think it's so interesting talking to you about how many ways this all crosses over.
Mm.
It's not all just like some spiritual thing that you did or all just multi-level marketing. It's like they're so intertwined. And
Mm.
same thing like with everything with the cults as
Absolutely.
well. But so well,
Mm.
you finally, obviously, you left the utility room.
Yes, I did. So what happened really was my sister was kind of just incredible and just kind of said to me, look, I know that you want to get to be with Rosa, and I know that you're not doing well at the moment, and I want to help you. So she said, if I can save up a little bit and give you money for a plane ticket, would you want me to do that? And I said, oh, yes. And thank you. And she did. And it was that really that was, and this is what makes me laugh, because if you say this to someone that believes in the law of attraction, then they're like, well, you finally released resistance.
Oh,
And there
yes.
it was for you. And that people is confirmation bias. But yeah, no, it was really, that was what made it, that's what made the change really. And so I came to be with Rosa and flew halfway around the world, and I was by no means out of spirituality at that point. That took a couple of years for me to get out of. I went into listening to people like Muji and Eckhart Tolle and Ram Dass and all these kinds of people, got into a very different kind of spirituality or different side of spirituality, and then eventually sat down with my basket of apples and picked over them to see which ones were moldy and didn't put very many back in. I just, and have ended up atheist and much happier because of it. I don't have a nagging sense of spiritual emptiness anymore, which is ironic. Because you'd expect that you would, wouldn't you? If you're not into all this kind of stuff, you would think you would be more fulfilled when you're spiritual. But actually, I'm not as a person at all. I'm much better off now. And interestingly, since leaving the law of attraction, since getting rid of all that kind of stuff, life has definitely improved in a lot of ways. We're always changing little things here and there and going towards improvements, aren't we? And certain areas need more work than others. But I think a big thing with this is it does take a bit of time to get things back. And get back to normal, and especially if you've invested a lot of money into something. In my case, that wasn't the case. I didn't have any money to invest, but yeah, I kind of for me it's been a gradual process of not only trying to get my life back to build a new life, really, because my life is so different now than what it was. I'm in a whole new country. I'm in a marriage now that I wasn't before, and all that kind of stuff. But it's kind of mental health wise as well. It's been a lot of stuff to make sense of. I need to take my own advice, really, and get into some therapy soon because it's one of those things that, as I say, financially it takes a while to get things sorted, but I've been unpicking a lot of stuff, and I've come to a place where I'm definitely much more stable than I ever was when I was involved in it. And I don't need the law of attraction. I don't need shadow work. I don't need someone telling me what the answer to life is. I'm doing a lot better with it, without it. And so it really, for me, that was the case. I know that there are people that are going to be going through worse things, and some people that might have it a little bit easier than I've had it. But yeah, for me, things have definitely improved in a lot of ways since getting out of it all. And I don't need the law of attraction to
I'm
to
really
live
glad that
happily.
Rosa, suggested, like, what if you just leave the shadow work for a little bit? That
Rosa's
is
incredible.
Just, high five, to Rosa for that. It's like, I'm really glad that she had the foresight to be like, maybe that's kind of something that, doesn't need to be. Because myself, I was doing journaling first thing in the morning. And you know what? All that does is get you back into that same loop of thought, just.
Yeah.
And it can be very detrimental, but I feel like once you do wake up, and it's like kind of like when you see the sun, you can't unsee it. Once you finally realize everything, you can't be like, well, I'm going to do this anyway, because it just doesn't feel right. You start seeing the huge holes that are there, that before you were convinced everything was just, peaches and cream and light and unicorns and, fairy dust and everything is just wonderful. So I'm so glad that she was able to help you with that. And I'm so glad that you are in a much better state now. And I am glad that you are my YouTube buddy, and that, you put out content to help other people, because I think it's so important to do. I think it's so important for us to share our stories and to let other people know, like, you're not crazy. You're not alone. You have been through something, and, it will take time to put Humpty Dumpty back to better, whatever I'm trying to say, to get yourself back together.
Yeah.
All of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But I really
definitely
appreciate everything that you've shared. And I don't need the law of attraction myself. I don't need multi-level marketing. Although whenever I hear certain people talk about things, it still has that appeal. There's something that's so provocative and seductive about what they say. And that's why it's so important to start unpacking what's really going on here.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it sounds so simple. It seems like it makes sense, but yeah, you look a bit closer, you pick it over, you apply a little bit of skepticism, and what you find is that it does fall down pretty quickly.
Yeah, it really does.
And there's so much, with the law of attraction. Like I don't know if this is Should I say more, or are we? Do you want to wrap it up?
Oh, I mean, if you want to say more, go ahead, say more, because anything that you can offer on this, I think is useful.
So this one is, it's a little bit of a head breaker, but I'll throw it out there and see what people think of it. How can you demonstrate that the thought that is creating that thing that you're manifesting originated in your head, and that it didn't come as a result of that thing coming to you anyway? Right. And I don't necessarily subscribe to the idea that things are coming to you, but to put it in those terms, how can you show that it was here first? I don't think that that's going to be very easy. And that was one of the things that really struck me with it, was that I can't show that thing has happened because I thought of it. All I know is I thought of it, and let's say I did think of it first, and then a thing did happen. All I can say is I thought of it. Yeah, there's a correlation, but there's not necessarily causation.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going. There's no, you can't say there's causality at all,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that you can't say that there isn't necessarily, it didn't start there, because obviously there could be an argument made for any point of view. But I think that to be so certain, from my point of view, would be unreasonable, because we can't demonstrate that beyond a shadow of a doubt. So I would require some demonstration in order for me to go anywhere near that idea again, in my life. And I think as well, it's because of when you have something that happens. Hang on, give me a sec to try and formulate what I'm trying to say. I keep disassociating a little bit. Like halfway through a sentence, my brain goes. But yeah, I think in terms of cause and effect, in terms of an idea being an idea starting in your mind, and an idea then seeming to have been created by your mind and then being manifested in the world, something we don't really consider is that humans aren't very good usually at recognizing what a coincidence is. We're pretty bad at recognizing coincidence. And I think partly that might be because we are kind of pattern seeking creatures. We do like to make sense of things. We do like to go, right, that is that, and that makes sense to me. And now I can live my life comfortable that thing isn't just chaotic. And I think that because of that kind of pattern seeking behavior, it is understandable that we would say, right, well, this thing here is not a coincidence. I can explain it in this way, and coincidence is just the coincidence of blah 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 blah, new agey things, repurposing words and all that kind of stuff. And I did go into this a little bit on just not my light there. I did go into this a little bit on my channel. I did a video about the law of attraction. And kind of pulling it apart a little bit on a few points. And one of the points wasn't on coincidence. I can't remember the exact number. I think it's quite a low number, but the question was, how many people do you have to put in a room for two of those people for there to be a 50% chance, I think, that two of those people will have the same birthday or something like that. And actually the number is lower than you would imagine. And I'm going to just go ahead and just say, watch that video, because I can't remember what the number is. Maybe you could include that in the description for people if they want to see that video about law of attraction that I did. But
I watched that video because I do remember you said, I don't remember what the number is off the top of my head either, but I watched it.
Yeah. And it is surprising, because when you say, how many people do you think? Most people go, I don't know, like 200, 300, 400. But actually, no, I think if I remember, it's in the double digits. Like it's a relatively low number. I think we're just notoriously terrible at recognizing coincidence as humans. And we want it to mean something. And fair enough if you want it to mean something. But to be so certain is where I would be reluctant, And I'm now, having been through some, part of what I went through, we've talked about here, I'm now incredibly reluctant to be certain about anything. And there's certain things you do have to just kind of, take as read and just say, right, I'll be sure about that, even if I'm not certain. But I think that to be certain about things for me, especially when I see someone else is like so confident and so certain about something, at that point, I'm a bit like, maybe this person isn't what they seem. Or how can they be so certain is often the question I ask. And I think that often what you find with people who are really certain, especially in terms of spiritual things, which are so difficult to verify, when you see someone being that certain about something, for me, that's a red flag. And I'll always look a bit deeper to see why they think that, how they can be so certain. It's an interesting anyway, because this is where you go down a whole other rabbit hole of how can I even be certain I exist, and that's a whole other direction.
It is, but in some of the things that you were talking about, it made me think, because I went down so far in the law of attraction rabbit hole of Esther Hicks, Joe Dispenza, all these different people that I listened to, and at the time it was comforting, but I think I needed that blanket of comfort based on what I had gone through and everything myself. And it felt good. And we as human beings, we want to do things that are going to make us feel good. And that, that we're part of something and part of the group and we're accepted and all of that. Yeah. But I don't know, I guess I would just caution people that if you're in a multi-level marketing company, maybe you should Google it and not be afraid of using Google, because you're probably going to find some really unpleasant things. And maybe you need to look at what those unpleasant things are. Why are there all these things that people are saying about it? And same thing with any of these, spiritually type things and law of attraction. And then on top of that, the fake gurus that are attached to a lot of these things that, have it all figured out. And you can just pay me $2,000 for this course and you're going to have results too. Oh, well, now there's another upsell. And, it just goes and goes and goes and goes.
Yeah, definitely. Something I would add to that, in terms of, there was something you said just before you said about the gurus thing. What were you saying? What was it?
The courses, and then there's an upsell, and oh gosh.
Just before that, you were saying about being aware of spiritual people who have it all figured out, and that was it. And you were saying about Google and Googling things. Yeah, I think it's something that I've heard. That I think it was So something that Lloyd Evans put across on his channel, on the John Cedars channel, was this win-win situation. Is that if you look something up and it turns out that actually it's wrong, that what they're saying is wrong, and you've heard the other side of someone who's criticizing a group that you're involved in, and it turns out that what they're saying is wrong, then you now understand the other side's argument better. So when someone says that to you, you can defend your group better, right? If it turns out that they are wrong, and that you're right in what you're believing. But if you do look it up and you find out that actually what they're saying is right, and that maybe the group that you're involved in isn't that good, then you've just saved yourself years, perhaps, of being involved in a group that isn't great. So really, although, and this is, of course, when there is a group that's discouraging you from looking up that kind of information, that is concerning, I would say, because there's really no harm in looking at the other side. If they're wrong, they're wrong, and they're wrong, and you can recognize that. But if you are to look it up and you do find that, they are, you are involved in something that's maybe not so good, then actually that's a good thing. You've realized something there and you're not involved in this anymore. And if you do look it up and it turns out they're great and these people are all wrong on the internet, then there you go. You've just updated the things that you can say to people that are trying to tell you that you're involved in something like an MLM or a pyramid scheme or whatever it is that they're saying. So really there's nothing to lose. And if someone is prepared to push you out of the group, cut you off from the group, make it life harder for you because you're looking up that kind of stuff, then that in and of itself should be concerning. I think that should be something that's people are going, oh, don't look at that. That's written by the haters, which is obviously that's Teal's word.
Oh no, it's MLMs too.
Yeah. Haters, okay.
I'd
The
be a
haters,
hater.
yeah.
I'd be a hater.
Yeah, same. So I think that, don't listen to the haters, right? First of all, it doesn't matter who's saying it. What we need to know is whether it's true or not. That's what we need to investigate here. And if it is true, then we know what's to be done. And if it's not true, what have you lost by looking at it? At least you understand the situation a bit better now. I think that's, yeah. And all credit goes to Lloyd for that, really. I've just rephrased it 3 different ways now.
Yeah, I really enjoy his
Yeah.
channel too.
Mm.
It seems like we tend to listen to the same people and everything, but
yeah.
It's so fascinating where there's all these different groups, whether it is Jehovah's Witness, Mormon, Teal Swan, multi-level marketing, same tactics, same things are going on. It's just, it's like they had the playbook and they're like, okay, here's the book. Now go and do these things. It'll work and you'll build your thing. Yeah. It's almost comical in some ways to me, because it's like, wow, that's just mind blown. There was something I wanted to ask you about, and I forgot.
All think, I was going to say, they all think that they're original and that they're the only ones doing it as well. And they act as if they are. But when you take a step back and you do a bit of research and you look into other groups and the formula, it's a formula. It's so formulaic. It's remarkable how similar they are. And you can look at the Jehovah's Witnesses and you stack that. In fact, I did a video. If you want to see, there's 3 people from 3 different groups who answered the same questions. I asked them all the same questions and their answers are strikingly similar. And the groups that they were involved with really couldn't be more different. One was like a kind of post-Hindu cult, if you like. One was Scientology and one was Jehovah's Witnesses. And yeah, it's incredible how similar those answers are. And I think that says something, really, that it's not that original, it's not that unique, it's not the only thing. And that's the thing with totalistic thought, isn't it? It's that this is the only thing, this is the best thing in the world ever, that you won't need anything else ever.
This is the answer.
And of course, life ain't like that.
No, but I mean, that's why I'm so glad that, like I said earlier, I'm so glad that you speak out. And I think that we both are coming at it in the same mindset in terms of we want to provide information to people, and also to have those people start to just question what they're doing and why they're doing it, and start trying to unpack it themselves and don't just take my word for it. Just don't take Andey's word for it. Go and start doing your own research.
Yeah, absolutely.
Listen to different viewpoints. Listen to people who are being critical, because I think it's important. What are the critics saying? And like you said earlier, if what the critics are saying is untrue, then you have ammunition to say why critics are untrue. But if the critics make you go, and start questioning even more, then maybe what you're involved in isn't all that you think it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And as well, like, if you know people that are involved, and I imagine, a lot of your viewers are people who were previously involved and perhaps know people who are still involved. What you were saying there about being kind is really it. And Stephen Hassan talks about being non-threatening. Non-threatening is a really, really important word here, I think. It's a mistake we've all made to be a little bit more aggressive than perhaps we should have been, or like to be like, you're in a cult. It just doesn't, it doesn't always yield the best results. But if we are talking to people who are in these groups, I think there's definitely a way to go about it. And I think it helps to understand other groups. I think that's the main thing. Whenever someone messages me and says, what do I do? Which is happening more and more. And I'm glad that people feel that they can ask me things like that. Although I am always clear, I'm not an expert, so please don't just take my word for stuff. But something that does happen a lot, what do I do? And I'd say the first thing I would always suggest is understand the group that your friend or whatever is involved in, and then understand other groups that also fit the bike model or are also fulfilling Lifton's 8 criteria for thought reform. When you understand other groups, then what you can do is ask gentle, non-threatening questions that highlight some of the issues without necessarily putting your finger on it and going, there you go, cult. See,
pyramid scheme. Yeah.
And yeah, exactly. And it will let them decide and figure things out for themselves. And people will, I think we want to feel like sometimes maybe they're not going to see it because they haven't yet, but people are able to. People are clever, people are intelligent, and they'll figure it out if you gently kind of, what did you say? Success leaves clues.
Yes.
Cults leave clues. And we can perhaps pepper the road with a few little things here and there that they might start to question things themselves.
Everything you're just saying right there, I think maybe if you would be interested in doing another video with me in the future, but I think talking about the very things you just said about what to do for people and being kind, because some of the things that I do see what is happening is that everybody is hopping on what the distributors, which are called Huns, hence, I'm a Hunbot, but I'm not anymore. I was, but they're just jumping on them for all their janky behavior. And yes, what they're doing is, yes, the mom guilt, the this, the that, it's, but beyond that, it's not coming from them. It's coming from what they have been through.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, how is a good way to talk to people? Because I feel like this punch in the gut that people are doing on social media by what I'm just going to say is Hun shaming. I think it's counterproductive, because I think that it gets people more entrenched in their thing by that. So maybe you would be open to discussing that.
Yeah, I'm up for doing that. I actually did a live stream with Chris Shelton and Shannon Q, where we did talk a little bit about that, but I'll definitely be able to talk to you about it, because it's going to go in a different direction, I'm sure, and we'll be able to cover a lot of stuff. I'd really be keen on that. Something else I was going to say was I honestly really agree with what you said there about the Hun shaming thing. I think that it doesn't help because as well, part and parcel with these groups is often a sense of a persecution complex a little bit. So I don't know to what extent that's present with MLMs, but it's definitely present with spiritual and religious organizations, even outside of cults. A lot of Christians have persecution complexes as Christians, and feeling like, it's very common, and that's nothing against Christians necessarily, but it does happen. And I think you see it kind of across the board with these kinds of groups to varying extents. And the moment you go against them, the moment you're like, is the moment you lose them, is the moment they throw in with the group more, is the moment they're not going to listen to you next time. And really what you want to do is preserve your relationship with these people. I think is do your best to stay connected with them and on things that aren't necessarily the group. And that's a whole other conversation. And really what I when I'm talking about this kind of stuff, I am relaying advice that I've got from other people. And that one again is the Stephen Hassan one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would definitely be up for that. That would be good fun to cover some of that stuff, and definitely really useful for people, I would hope, at least.
I think so too, because, I think one of the ways that with what we're doing, the type of content that we're putting out, it can be that life vest for someone who is having questions and they don't really know where to go to find the answers. Not saying that you or I, like, we have all the answers to everything, but
join the cult.
Right. But we at least have had an experience and can come at this with our experience to use as an example, and to encourage people to start questioning and to start thinking for themselves again, and that they're fine. Like, one of my things that I put on Instagram not too long ago is like, it's okay to say that you failed at MLM, because there's a lot of shaming, because if you just kept going, you would have the model of what you're doing is against you to begin with.
Yeah.
So it's better to get out, but I think
the success is failing at that point. Maybe that's one you can give that to them. Like, you could sell that to them probably as a slogan. Success is failing.
Probably
failed forward by getting out. Failing forward is getting out of
Uh,
an MLM.
Absolutely. Oh, maybe I need to use that. People would relate to that.
Don't do a teal. Put my name under it.
Says Andey. Oh my gosh. Well, I want to thank you so much. I think we've kind of run the gamut on this, and I hope that it will help people start thinking about like how to really start looking at the law of attraction, if that's part of what you have been
Mm,
doing within
mm,
being in an MLM, or if you know someone
mm,
who has been in an MLM, that you can kind of start understanding it and just be gentle with yourself and gentle to
mm,
others, you know.
mm. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's been
Oh,
a pleasure.
I hope you found my conversation with Andey to be as informative and as lightning as I did, and maybe you saw yourself in his story or in my story, maybe even just a little tiny piece of your own story. I would love to know about it, and go ahead and drop that in the comments and let us know what else you would like for Andey and I to discuss in an upcoming video. I really appreciate you being here, and if you enjoyed this content, make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell while you're at it, and also give the video a thumbs up. Doing any of those things really does help my content get seen more, and I want it to be seen more. Also, make sure that you hop on over to Andey's channel and check him out. He's got some great material. I will put a link to his video about the law of attraction in the description so that you can check that out. And remember, if we want there to be a change in this world, it is up to us to get our stories out there and to talk about it, and change starts now.